As the week rolls on, more Q&As will follow. So as you guys who are watching closely may know, tomorrow is Friday, and that's when the demo, the PvE demo, is scheduled to go live. At that point, the community is very much going to overtake me, or at least get up on par with what I know about the expansion, because that is exactly what I played. So these frequent Q&As that I've been doing, we may see that this is the last one. Maybe I'll do one more, but then we will be able to all play together and learn a bunch of new stuff, and maybe I'll do them slightly less frequently. So let's get a good round of questions in right before the big day tomorrow. And the first one I see here is very fitting. It's from Tim Anderson, who says, "Hey WP, I have a question about the August 11th to the 13th preview. I have a friend who wants to try GW and the expansion, and I don't have any level 80 characters. Most you have level 80 to test on the preview. Sorry for my English." You managed to struggle your way through there. Yeah, so you're basically asking if you've got a friend and they don't have a level 80 character, can they play? The answer to that is yes. You will create a new character, and they'll dump you in there on level 80, not with the new elite specs, but you will have the old elite specs. You'll have everything fully unlocked as of Heart of Thorns right now, and you'll be at 80. I'm a little annoyed with the way they do gearing on this, because this event is really important for spreading the game, for growing the scene. Anyone can play. It's not like with the Heart of Thorns demos, where you had to actually pre-purchase Heart of Thorns to get in on it, and they use it as a reason to get people to pre-purchase. They've been completely open about this one. Anyone with a free-to-play account can go in and experience it, and obviously that would have cost them money. There's a lot of people who might have pre-purchased that now haven't, so the only way that they get their money back on that is if, through word of mouth and whatever, people actually say, "Hey, look, this game's getting an expansion. You don't even have to pay to see if you like it. Do you want to try it out with me? Go get a free-to-play account." That's what ArenaNet are banking on, and so that's what's one of the things that's most important about this demo. And yeah, in my opinion, they've been a bit crap about the way they give you gear to actually go in and experience, because you're going to have these totally new people who have no real understanding of how the game works, that will instantly be on a level 80 character, won't truly understand the way that specializations work and stuff, and what you want is them to have a good strong build right out of the gate. And I don't know, man, I don't know whether they set the right builds up. I don't know whether they've really taught the community the fastest way to equip gear from all those gear boxes that will get flooded into your inventory, and this whole thing of established players having to go to their banks and drop stuff off, just none of it's particularly ideal, but we'll see. Yes, you don't need to pre-existing play the game. Just tell your friends, hey, yeah, come and make an account. They will sort it out all from there. It'll be a little bit fiddly, but good enough to at least get through the demo itself. Next question here is from Matthew Minette, who has taught me something. Says, "Hey WP, the website which details the mounts talks about the Jackal being created by the Djinn. What are your thoughts on them having a hand in taking down Balthazar in other ways than offering us mounts? Or do you feel like they may succumb to Balthazar's influence?" Credit for the question goes to my friend Dylan, but I wanted to see it answered because I thought it was interesting to hear you talk about. Yeah, the Djinn, I think, are one of those smaller things that people haven't quite appreciated could be super cool now that we're going back into this region of the world. The Djinn really flourished in their lore and so forth when we were in Alona way back when, and we've seen a little bit in Guild Wars 2. We've seen stuff to do with Zomaros that really we could get extra answers on. I think that would be really fun to have the Djinn be a big part of the story. The Djinn also just looked super badass and interesting. Now, in one of the trailers, I haven't done an analysis of it yet. In one of the trailers, there's a mysterious floating creature standing, looking out over like a ledge of some kind. I've heard someone speculate this could be a seer, and maybe that's true as well. But the first thing I thought when I saw it, bizarrely, because it doesn't really have the colors to fit it, but was something along the lines of a Djinn. The Djinn were awesome. Going back to the hidden city of Adashim, which was protected by the Djinn and so forth, could be very, very fun. We've obviously seen that Kralkatorrik has destroyed massive areas of Vabi, or at least the wilderness areas near Vabi, and the idea that anyone who was caught in that maybe escaped to the hidden city once again, as they attempted to when Abaddon was invading 250 years ago, really excites me. That could be a reason for the Djinn to come back. I don't know whether I like the idea of them being like influenced by Balthazar and becoming bad guys like that. I think they're much more interesting in other places to explore. The fun thing about the Djinn is actually they don't have to appear in that form. They're elementals that can actually take the shape of people, and having a Djinn do something like that and have characters like that, you know, have them be meaningful parts of the plot could be awesome. Maybe for the expansion itself, or maybe they should wait with it until Season 4, when we start going even further south through Elona and beyond the Fortress of Jahai and stuff. We'll have to see. But great stuff. I did not know that the Jackal mount, until right here, right now, was created by the Djinn. Just that fact alone, as long as mount acquisition is a big part of story, which they've suggested it might be, that fact alone might mean we see at least something to do with the Djinn in the plots, and that's great. If it only exists as flavor text on the UI, needless to say, I think that would be disappointing. Let's see how far they push it. So Axby1922 here says, what's your most anticipated stat combo if you're able to share them? You know, it's a questions like this that was on the forefront of my mind when I started doing these Q&As. So what I know about the stat combos are this, and they're kind of flaky, just candid conversations I've had with devs about this stuff, and I don't know whether, you know, immaculate things we should hone in on, especially considering the whole Power Reaper might get stronger thing, and now so far it doesn't seem to have been. I would maybe not look too closely at this, but what I've heard is it's something like 4 to 5 new stat combos coming to the game, and that could mean maybe 1 for each map, and that 3 or 4 of them, depending on whether there's 4 or 5, 3 or 4 of them are going to be 4 stat combos. And the last one is actually, they were looking at doing a 3 stat combo. So I have no idea what any of them are except 2. One of them's Grievers, and that is the super glassy one that is really not, you know, PvP competitive, but it's very glassy, it's very interesting for PvE, and could represent the birth, with this Gen 2 set of elite specs, the birth of, like, true power Condi hybrid builds that really can kind of deliver both at once, ever since the Condi changed a long time ago, but in a meaningful way, a way that we actually have to build gear to do. So that's Grievers, and that is power main, condition main, ferocity and precision as the miners. That one's pretty exciting, and a lot of you know about that. I shared that with people right at the start of all of this at the post show. The other one, I cannot remember its name, but I've had a good look at it because of the Spellbreaker collections as the elite specialization, where you're gathering this stat type as you build towards your final weapon. It's another 4 stat combo, and what you're looking at is power main, healing power main, and then precision miner and condition damage miner. Now, that stat combo might sound really weird and difficult to place for some of you, and what might be equally weird is thinking about how it links in with the Spellbreaker, who really doesn't have that much healing power on them. But I think the healing power is a component of at least 1 trait on the Spellbreaker, and comboed under certain circumstances, the Spellbreaker could be super sustainy. I'll have to have a closer look at all of this when I do my big presentation on the Spellbreaker itself later on, but that could be what that's really built around. But yeah, so power, healing power, and then precision Condi damage. Odd stat combo. As for the other potentially 2 or even 3, I couldn't tell you guys, so that's the best answer I can give you as to my favorite right now. Not much to go on, but there you have it. Interesting question from Nathan Durban, who says, do you think Path of Fire will have any connection to current holiday events, specifically with the Mad King Thorn connection? So people who don't know this, they set up kind of a back and forth and a bit of banter between Mad King Thorn and Palawa Joko, especially in the later iterations of Halloween in GW1. And it was very fun to witness and to see unfold. In fact, there are some instances that got added in those later Halloweens that I remember very little about at this point. But yeah, I think that this would be an interesting place for them to go to, more than just the lore opportunity they have there. I think what you got to look at is the fact that Halloween's a big thing for Guild Wars, and they always try to go out a little bit harder on Halloween, and Halloween is going to be the first big thing after this release. Little tidbit for those of you who missed it all those years ago, but 10 years ago when Nightfall came out, it came out as well right around Halloween, similar to how Heart of Thorns did 2 years ago, and so you might see that they do something there. I'd love to see Halloween decorations in Amnoon, for example, but whether they went to the effort of building all of those in there, we don't know right now. That would be fun, and definitely if they went further with the lore, that would also be fun. But remember, they're festivals, and the last long while, the devs have just been trying to get the festivals to an automated place, and so that they can focus on other things. I guess it comes down to current events on that one. Artie's Umre has a kind of a weird question, not one that excites me that much, but I think is interesting to look at. So they say, do you think that with the Sylvari trying to tame the Risen and having Palawa Joko and his army of undead being in the story, we could get playable Risen race in the future? maybe next game in like 200 years when the Risen built a whole society would be so amazing if we see the birth of a new society. I don't think that they need to take the undead to build a society. And in fact, if we're talking about just like as a franchise question, and hey, will there be another game produced by ArenaNet that's set 200 years in the future? It's not an expansion to Guild Wars 2 or anything, but they set it 200 years in the future. What do they do with the world building? Yeah, let's have a big undead prominent race. I think in those terms, I don't know whether Guild Wars really will want to do that. Guild Wars, especially with the sequel, made big strides to sort of carve out its own fantasy world without resorting to like very typical undead civilizations marching around. All of that said, we have the undead as a civilization marching around in this upcoming expansion and in the lore specifically with the Alolan regions. It's amazing, this question to me, because for years, the question has been, hey, do you think we'll go to the Crystal Desert and then we'll get a playable undead race? Because, you know, those Risen there, or those undead, I should say, they're not like the Risen. They can think and they can feel and they act on their own will. So maybe we'll get them as a playable race. And now it's so funny that it's happened. We're getting this expansion. There isn't a race, as many of us suspected, sadly. And at the same time, we had episode 6, and now people are, oh, there's still an opportunity with Zaitan's undead because they're bumbling around. I don't know. I really doubt this is going to happen. I'm not even that excited about this happening. New races for me, there's a couple of races that I'm really excited about, and if it's not those races, my enthusiasm drops off quite harshly. But I think the only reason that we saw that with the Sylvari in episode 6 was because it's a really logical, fun thing to look at right before we go to this new region of the world, and another sort of variety of undead is given to us. You know, I think one thing that this expansion has to do very carefully is really be clear with us about the differences between the various enemy factions. What is different about these new undead versus the undead of old in 2012? And instead of being coy about that and sort of saying, okay, let's just ignore the Risen and going back to Ore, they sort of threw them right in our path and they addressed it directly. And I think that's great. I think that's very cool. And I think that's as deep as it goes. The Mobot has an interesting extension on a question we answered earlier that I think is very much worth saying, and I'll expand on. So he says, in regards to the why are we worried if Balthazar's going to absorb the magic question, I'm surprised more people haven't mentioned that the process is probably not 100% efficient. Like, even if Balthazar absorbs as much magic as he can, there's still too much put into the environment that messes things up. I think you're totally right about that, because what did we see when the Bloodstone exploded, which is not equivalent to an Elder Dragon as far as we know? We saw that Balthazar grabbed a ton, but there was still loads of ley line magic that went everywhere. There was still loads of unbound stuff that's gone all over the place. And yeah, presumably that would happen with an Elder Dragon death as well, not necessarily an enormous explosion like with the Bloodstone, but I think that there is some value in that argument. The other thing as well that I never talked about before, but I think is worth noting, is they've kind of set up this idea that over the ages in Tyria, you have these ancient, big, powerful beasts, and some of them rise to the top of their food chains, and then they start gathering magic. And then the most powerful of them fight one another and take magic from one another and get stronger, and take magic and get stronger. And it sort of keeps going up in a big pyramid, just like a food chain, until eventually you have like one super powerful entity at the end that's got tons of magic, and it will mess you up. And what do we call that thing? An Elder Dragon. And it's just like a part of the cycle of existence that Tyria is. And if we think about it that way, you look at the top of that food chain, and it hasn't all congregated into just one entity. It's ended at 6. After all these thousands and thousands of years, there's 6 separate things that have divvied up all of the magic, and then they fall asleep and then wake up again. Now, I'm not saying that we necessarily can't condense all of this magic into 4 entities, or 2, or even 1, but the fact that there's 6, and it seemed to have stabilized, there was some kind of equilibrium at 6 Elder Dragons, sort of suggests that maybe Balthazar can't grab 3 Elder Dragons and then some, and that there is still this Oblivion story vaguely there. I mean, we can do these speculations, we can do these discussions, but do I think that any of this is clear or has been properly tackled by the game itself? Is this subject material being appropriately handled? I think the answer is still no. There are ways that the devs can write this and talk about this that give us sound, logical explanations, but they're a long way from doing that at the moment, and I think people are right to say it's kind of plot-holey and kind of weird. I think it has been an issue. F Hawk says, hey WP, do you think we'll have a dedicated meta event only map like Dragon Stand in the upcoming POF expansion? Well, they haven't said anything officially about this, but I will say if you're ArenaNet at the moment, what you're doing is you're looking at Heart of Thorns and what was wrong with Heart of Thorns and what people didn't like about Heart of Thorns, and you are trying to present a different experience. And you know, we already know that the Path of Fire team were the same guys that went back and fixed a ton of Heart of Thorns stuff a couple of months after HOT came out. And they've talked very openly about having learned a lot of lessons from that, right? So I think that if you're in that position and the main question on your mind is, okay, what didn't our community like about the first expansion so we can do it better the next time around? One of the number one complaints about Heart of Thorns, without a shadow of a doubt, was people's upset that they were being forced onto the game's time scales and time frames instead of their own. Guild Wars 2 was always about people being able to get the maximum value out of their time, even if they could only play an hour or if they could play 3 hours. It was about catering to people no matter what your schedule was, so that if you had a full-time job and a mortgage to pay and kids, you could still get meaningful value out of this MMO. And then Heart of Thorns released, and for a lot of people, stuff like Dragon Stand, especially Dragon Stand, where it's like, okay, be on the map right here on this specific hour or you're screwed. People didn't like that, and there was so much complaining about that. So I think if you're in ArenaNet's position and you're building Path of Fire, I think you look at that and you say, do we do it the same way this time? And I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't something exactly like Dragon Stand, or if they do go for that style of event, maybe they'll change it up. I have my own problems as well with the way they did Dragon Stand, the way it was a good part of the story, but they were too scared to make it a part of the story, and there were a lot of problems that were inherent to all of that, that I think is a bit of a messy concept that maybe I wouldn't be too sad to see them step away from. We'll see. Alpha Whiskey 12 has opened the door to a huge discussion here. And I'll touch on it a little bit before we move on. He says, you keep mentioning specific niches with regard to elite specializations. Do you mean a build excelling specifically for a game mode, like Wild vs. Wild, PvE, etc., or a role, support, damage, healing? Also, with the introduction of more and more elite specializations now and in the future, the latter list seems to grow smaller as more specs can fulfill those roles, losing their unique identity. Thoughts? I've got a million thoughts on this, but specifically let's hone on this idea. Is it okay to release an elite specialization that is only good in one game mode? And I think lots of people are going to have different answers to that. I think the best way to tackle this discussion is to look at Scrapper from Heart of Thorns, because Scrapper was very much something that really excelled in PvP, and people really liked in PvP, and you got a lot of use out of the function gyro in PvP. I don't think, by the way, there was a reason that the function gyro couldn't work in PvE. It was just up to the raid team and the Fractals team and even the open world team and so on to create more opportunities for it, as I've mentioned several times recently. But this was definitely like more of a PvP thing, and some people really hate that. I think it depends on how broad your experience of Guild Wars 2 is, really. If all you do is raid, you're going to stick your middle finger up at anything that is a PvP oriented thing, or anything that's a world versus world thing, or anything that's open world. Like the super sustainy but comparatively low damage Reaper, right? People stick their middle fingers up at it all the time, and people were really hating it when they don't care anymore about open world. But there's a silent number of people who only play open world, and they're like, yeah, I quite like my Reaper. So I think this all comes down to how narrow your experience of Guild Wars 2 is. If you have a lot of dipping around the various game types, I think you're going to welcome this idea of elite specializations thriving in one game mode or another. And I think, by the way, as well, as more years come out and more waves of elite specializations release, the more reasonable it will seem that, hey, okay, one of the engineers' elite specializations doesn't really have a place in many places, but it's good in PvP at least. The others have got more splash out. And I've been thinking about this a lot as well with regard to Elementalists. You know, that we seem to be seeing a push, especially with the core balance patch recently, that Tempest, they're really honing into that support area. That's its niche. It's going to be very different to Weaver, which seems to be much more about the damage and frontlining Condi power hybrid damage, perhaps. So we're seeing that they're really solidifying that difference there. And so naturally, if Tempest becomes sort of a much more raw supporty thing, it goes into competition with the Druid. And a lot of people who only raid will say, well, that's horrible. That means I'll never play Tempest anymore because it's better to run Druids in this format 90% of the time. And that's fair to people in that position. I, however, run a lot of Fractals, T4 Fractals quite frequently. And I'll tell you what, from my perspective, playing an Auramancing Tempest that's got, you know, tons of protection, tons of different auras, tons of blinds and CCs and so forth, Auramancing Tempest is an amazing carry for T4 Fractals. If you're going going to find yourself around pugs, or you're just doing casual runs with friends and you're not going all crazy about it, I find that build amazing. And so I actually feel quite content with what they're doing with Tempest right now. I'm looking forward to Weaver coming in with a lot of damage, and Tempest, I view myself still running that in Fractals for the next 2 years at least, until maybe something further rocks the boat. And what I'm talking about there is being okay with Tempest only shining in one game type, the Fractals game type, if you will. And not everyone will be okay, but I think it comes up to our personal experiences. This is also why I think it's so important everybody tries more than just one little thing instead of burrowing into a little hole, because I think you're just creating so many opportunities to be upset with balance decisions that are made if all you ever do is world versus world, or all you ever do is PvP, because the game is more than that. And if you're not playing more than that, you're not going to quite understand why a lot of changes go through. Anyway, like I said, a huge discussion. Let's get back to another topic. So Alan Shaker here says, hi WP. He's my new best friend, by the way, for this question. He says, hi WP. So I have a question about the way they are telling story in terms of expansions and Living World. In 2012, when the personal story ended, they gave us a big conclusion, the death of an Elder Dragon, and a nice little celebration in Fort Trinity, and there was some sense of finality to it. Obviously, there were still many unanswered questions, but at least there was at least some satisfaction in knowing we had completed a story. Ever since Season 1, however, all the stories they've been telling end on some sort of cliffhanger. Sure, we get the death of Scarlet, Morgemoth, and Lazarus, but it always feels like we didn't finish anything and that we have to wait for a proper conclusion, or at least that's how it's left me feeling. So my question is, do you think that that sense of finality is important to the storytelling, and if so, how could they still create excitement for future stories without cliffhangers on the last episode act? I actually think very easily, and the answer to this is just the thorn in the side, really, of pursuing Living World as a storytelling objective still to this day. So this thing you're talking about with a conclusion and a sense of finality, they did that really well in GW1 too. Originally when Prophecies came out, they didn't have it, but then they retroactively added it. There was a little celebration that we eventually got in Joknar's Forge. When Factions came out, we had an instance like that where credits rolled and you could get a special ranger pet and you could load out into an elite area of Kaineng and flaunt the fact you'd finished the story over everyone else. When Nightfall came out, you had it again in the Realm of Torment. At the end of Eye of the North, we had... Oh, did we have it at the end of the Eye of the North? I think maybe something similar in Destruction's Depths or somewhere where the dwarves were hanging out. They used to do this a lot. And so Guild Wars 2 continued the trend. They did it in Fort Trinity, but then we hit Living World. So, funnily enough, Living World Season 1 kind of did do it. And that's because we had the proper finale of Season 1, which was the Breachmaker fight and stomping Scarlet and so forth. And that was very cliffhangery. But there was a small patch that went out later that was kind of a recap patch. We hung out at the Dead End bar and just talked to the various characters about everything that happened. It didn't really feel like much of a celebration, but it was a recap and it was that sort of stopgap. It was that breathing room, and that was nice. But ever since Season 2, they haven't done it. Obviously, Heart of Thorns was mega crunch and it was missing that kind of conclusion, that feeling of having finished something. And in fact, if you go back and you watch my Heart of Thorns review and my section on the story, which I produced right as the expansion came out. In my review, I was really critical of this. I really hated that there wasn't a proper conclusion, and that's why I loved so much when current events finally did at least something with Khaled Bolg and Traherne's death. But you're right, they haven't done much of it, but I think that's just them playing catch up, and that's the fact that Heart of Thorns was very constrained. I think Path of Fire should, and hopefully will, have a proper conclusion like this. I think it's really important, and I would love to see that happen. I'd love to have a little bit of a celebration instead of just major cliffhanger, and then we get to go on and explore further. Obviously, you do want tie-ins. You do want the all these fair weather players. Many of you listening to me right now are fair weather players. You don't look at Guild Wars 2 and then you hear an expansion, you think, oh, I'll go and watch Wood and Potatoes again, and hello, I see you there. People like you, ideally, when you get to the end of the expansion, you'll see some kind of hook that is actually interesting to you to keep you going, but that doesn't mean they need to go on a crazy cliffhanger. We should have a sense of finality and celebration, and I want to see it, definitely. Grapes has a fun topic, says, do you think we'll start getting more frequent expansion packs like in Guild Wars 2? Yeah, I'm guessing you mean Guild Wars 1 there. I quite preferred the quick succession in which they launched expansions in the first game. The stories were great, and it kept the game fresh by constantly changing where you'd be hanging out for the most part. So yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this. First of all, no, I don't think it's going to happen. I think that they need time to develop, and I like what they're doing with Living World as a bridge between expansions and an expansion about every 2 years. I think that that's good timing and that that's proven to work in other MMOs. I think that it should work here. You've got to remember as well, that there is a thing about money in the audience. If they started doing yearly expansions, for example, even if they were perfect, amazing quality, even if they were bigger than Path of Fire, and they were actually capable of doing that every year, and we got a new generation of Elite Specializations every year, I think you would, I mean, we're diehard nerds and we love this franchise and we'd probably go for it, but the majority of people would start saying, wow, I'm being asked to spend $50 every year or $30 every year. How is this that different to a subscription fee? And there, it is different because you'd have a choice and so forth, but I think that you would start to run up against issues with that. 2 years probably is somewhere around the sweet spot. But the other thing I'll say about this comment here too is this idea that they should maybe do it because they clearly could do it in Guild Wars 1 and that there's a precedent. Two things, Guild Wars 2 is so different and the way they develop for it and the complexity of the game is so different that I don't think that that's any kind of a thing we should ever root ourselves in. But second, Guild Wars 1 didn't do it, really. People always like to think about this heyday for Guild Wars 1. It was a period of about 12 months. What they managed to do was produce a good chunk of Nightfall while they were making factions, and they were under mega crunch, and that's it. That's what they did, and they had a 6-month gap between those, and then they said, no, this is way too much, we need to change things. They cancelled Utopia, made Eye of the North, and then disappeared for years as they made Guild Wars 2. It's not like they ever had some well-working, well-oiled machine in the Guild Wars 1 days, and they were succeeding in their ambitions. They were under insane crunch. They put out 3 products very quickly, and immediately dropped it. I don't think we can call that a success, just because it happened several years ago now. And so I don't think that we should ever be beholden to whatever they may have accomplished, or more obviously didn't accomplish back in that first game. I think once every 2 years is about where we can expect. Another question here from Gabriel Lurio says, WP, I always hear people saying that the Mirage has this new dodge to blend in with all the clones, but if I hit a Mirage and he dodge, he won't lose health, so is this new dodge easy to perceive? Well, yes, you've got a point, but don't forget the Mirage also has a trait which means all the clones can dodge. They'll go into it as well when you do, and so that's still not... Today, that might be an identifier that's something up, but once the Mirage is out, that still won't necessarily help you too much because the person could be traded and it could be a clone anyway. I kind of just wanted to jump onto this question to teach you guys something else about the Mirage. I realize I haven't said at all right now, but that dodge mechanic, okay, it allows you to dodge. You can still dodge in directions, but it allows you to dodge while standing still, but most importantly, it allows you to dodge while casting. So you can pop evade frames on yourself in the middle of abilities. It's got like this multicast idea and it's absolutely insane. And that's one of the coolest things about Mirage. And I realized the other day, I haven't even talked to you guys about it. So yes, it's triggerable in the middle of other animations. And just let that sink in for a second. And now maybe you're seeing a little bit more of why this thing with the dodging on the Mirage is so crazy. I kind of wish actually that the Mirage got some kind of a UI shake-up, like the Daredevil did when it got its 3rd dodge, to represent the fact that these aren't classic dodges anymore, but there's some kind of, new blurred mode. But yeah. And last question of all, I should not have left this for last. It's a big topic. Grant Burley says, how do you think the leaks have affected the excitement surrounding POF? So I'm sure there's a huge amount of people who saw the leaks, were excited by the leaks, and maintained that the leaks were a good thing. But personally, through the conversations I've had and through seeing how people have reacted online to it, I think it did do quite a lot of damage. I loved seeing, for example, when episode 6 came out and we were revealed we could go to the Crystal Desert, how little note there was on that. Nobody cared. Nobody had any interest, and that in itself is already a really interesting and exciting prospect to me. And then, of course, when the trailer came out and all the mounts, the main question people were saying when the mounts were revealed, as far as I could see, was not, whoa, mounts, this is badass. I mean, there was a degree of that from people that didn't know, but a huge number of people were saying, oh, where's the Griffin? Why don't we have the 5th mount that I saw was leaked, and now obviously I'm entitled to? So there definitely has been a lot of that, but it's not like it devastated the announcement. Obviously, we've got a lot of excitement. Obviously, it's been interesting to a lot of people, and while it may be a little bit hamstrung, it's all in the past now. We'll move forward, and we'll keep a close eye out over the next 2 years to see what the next giant leak is, shall we? I'm sure that'll be a lot of fun struggling to make videos for months on end again, because I'm trying to not explain it all to people. Well, there you go, guys. That is today's Q&A. Thank you very much for watching. Remember, tomorrow's the big day. Don't just play the demo on your own, but if you've got a mate that maybe has never bought Guild Wars 2 or has no interest in it, don't forget, it is completely completely free. I do have a link you can share with them in the description of all of my videos if you want to, but even if you don't use that link, just try and get some people in. Let's see if we can grow the scene a bit, and who knows, maybe they'll get hooked because it comes at basically no cost to them whatsoever. I don't even think you have to download the full client because it will do the streaming client, and they just need to get the demo specific maps. So what could be easier? Thanks guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back for some more Q&A pretty soon. Leave your questions down below, and I'll see you next time.